Hello, today's lecture will be all about ATP, which is energy. Hopefully you recognize this word. We've talked about it before with organelles and in all of our discussions with energy so far. This is going to be relating back to another one of our characteristics of life, right? Energy. It should have been obvious. But let's talk way more in depth about what ATP is, how it's formed, where it's formed, and why we should care about it. So a quick review is that your cells need energy to do work. And when I say do work, I mean anything. Anything that they need to do, they need energy to do it. So anything that keeps you alive needs energy. That's why when you're really, really tired at night and you don't have any energy, you're super lethargic, right? You can't do anything because you have no energy. So your cells can't do the work that you are expecting them to do. And you get this energy by eating food. And then you break down all of those polymers that you're eating into the monomers, and those monomers are used to create this energy. So some of the types of work, you can see it here, like transport work, right? So like moving things in and out of a membrane, sometimes, right, with active transport that needs energy. Mechanical work, like moving muscles. Chemical work, like using enzymes to build products or break down products. All of that stuff needs energy. So the purpose of ATP is that it's sort of like the extra energy that you get, right? If I ate like a huge cheeseburger, I'm not going to use all of that energy that I am going to gain from that food at once, right? If I eat a huge cheeseburger, I'm not going to go run like a marathon right now, but I might want to use that energy I could get from that cheeseburger like 4 hours from now. And the way that I can do that is because my cells are going to store that extra energy in the form of ATP. So I don't use all my energy at once. Instead, I store extra energy in this form called ATP. And ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. So ATP, adenosine triphosphate. ATP is the usable form of energy. If I eat a cheeseburger, I cannot just say, oh, well, I now have, a piece of cheese in my stomach. I can use that energy. No, it doesn't work that way. It needs to be converted, right? I need to break down those polymers into monomers, and those monomers get converted into ATP. And once it's in the form of ATP, then it is usable. So I cannot use it unless it's in the form of ATP. That's mega super important. So underline that. You can't use energy unless it's in the form of ATP. So let's talk about what ATP actually is. So ATP, adenosine triphosphate, has one adenosine, okay? This is connected to a ribose, which is a sugar. We'll talk more about it later on in the year, but I just need you to understand that adenosine is connected to a ribose, and then the ribose is connected to 3 phosphates, right? 3 means tri means 3, so triphosphate means 3 phosphates. So these bonds that connect the phosphates to each other, especially this last one, is a high energy bond. So when that bond breaks, that's how we get the energy out of ATP that we use to do cellular work. So you should draw this picture and understand that these are the components that make up ATP: adenosine, ribose, 3 phosphates. So how is energy released? I sort of just mentioned this, but let's talk about it a little bit more in depth. So enzymes, our buddies enzymes, right? The proteins that speed up chemical reactions, break that high energy bond between the 2nd and 3rd phosphate. When they break that bond, the phosphate is released into, the body. It's then a free-floating phosphate, and also that energy is released for the cell. So you start with ATP, you break this 3rd bond, or the bond between the 2nd and 3rd phosphate, release the phosphate, release the energy. ATP then becomes ADP, adenosine diphosphate. Di means two. So now we have two phosphates. It just makes sense, right? Two phosphates. So lost a phosphate, gained some energy. We now have adenosine diphosphate, ADP. And then when you eat food, right, and you break down those polymers into monomers, phosphates are also broken down from the polymers, and those phosphates can then be added in to ADP. And when you put that phosphate back into ADP, it becomes ATP again, and it's just a cycle. So you break the phosphate, you get energy. You're living as ADP, you eat food, you gain a phosphate, it becomes ATP again, the cycle goes on and on. This is how we continuously get energy and use energy. The energy is stored in the chemical bonds. So in that bond between the two phosphates, that's where the energy is, nowhere else. Okay, it doesn't get stored inside the phosphate, it doesn't get stored in the adenosine, it's stored in those bonds. So ATP stores more energy than ADP. Hopefully this is sort of like an obvious piece of information, because there are more bonds in ATP than there are in ADP. Therefore, ATP must have more energy because it has more bonds that store more energy. So because ATP has two bonds, it has more energy than ADP, which only has one bond. Which is why this whole entire set of notes is about ATP, because that's where most of our energy comes from. And where is this made? The mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. Of course it's making our energy, because that's its job. So ATP is made during cellular respiration, and this is the formula for cellular respiration. If you're looking at this, you might notice that most of these products, the reactants, all the stuff that's going on in this equation look pretty familiar. We're going to talk way more about it in our next set of notes, but just, have that thought floating around. Where have you seen C6H12O6 and 6O2 and 6CO2 and 6H2O? Where have you seen that before? Okay, so we're going to get into cellular respiration next time, but I want you to write down that ATP is made in the mitochondria during the process of cellular respiration. All right, great job. I'll see you next time.